My name is Steve Clermont. I'm the Director of Planning and Deployment and Senior Project Manager at CTE. I hope you've all enjoyed the previous events and networking sessions. We've got another great session for you today. I'd like to welcome everyone to Session 4, Innovations at Scale, Lessons from the Field. We'll have time for questions at the end of the panel discussion, so please use the Q&A feature on the edge of your screen to ask questions at any time. I've had the good fortune to work with zero-emission buses over 10 years, helping many of you in the audience deploy your first order of zero-emission buses. More recently, I've had the opportunity to help agencies plan their transition to a 100% zero-emission fleet based on the lessons learned from those early zero-emission bus deployments. We all recognize that there are numerous challenges to scaling up from a pilot project to a depot full of electric buses. And that is what this session is all about. What can we learn from others that are working to meet scalability challenges head on? The transit market is the perfect setting for testing and demonstrating new transportation technologies. There's federal funding to cover incremental cost, professional operators and maintenance staff, and fixed routes that provide a control for data collection and analysis. Transit may have felt the pains of being on the bleeding edge of this new technology. However, we're now seeing the benefits of resulting from transit acting as early adopters, as zero-emission technologies has propagated to other markets, including ports, airports, commercial delivery, and where it's needed most, school buses. I'd like to welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Caley Edgerly, President and CEO of Thomas Built, a leader in the school bus market. Mr. Edgerly joined Thomas Built as Vice President of Operations in 2012 and continued in that role until taking over as President and CEO in March of 2015. Please join me in welcoming Caley Edgerly.
Thank you, Steve. Can you hear me? There we go.
Caley, I think you need to be a little bit louder.
All right. Can you hear me, Steve?
Probably a little bit more if you could speak up.
Okay. Now.
That's good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me, everybody. Certainly, Steve started that out with lessons learned and ramp up to scalability. And we're living that at Thomas right now. I'm humbled to be able to speak to you. Usually a keynote speaker, shouldn't they be an expert, right? You should be an expert talking to a crowd of this size. And I make no provisions of being an expert, but I will share kind of our EV journey that we've been on for about the last 5 years here at Thomas Built Buses. But just a little background information. I'm lucky enough to be here at Thomas Built Buses, which is a subsidiary of Daimler. Some of you may know that Daimler is also the parent company of Mercedes-Benz passenger car, but I work in the Daimler truck division. I've worked in that division for about 26 years now, oddly enough, starting out at Detroit Diesel, making diesel engines. And now I find myself in the throes of this EV revelation. Quite exciting one. But within our truck division, we also have Freightliner, Western Star, Detroit Diesel. It gives us tentacles to learn quite a bit on this journey pretty quickly. But we are the school bus division of Daimler Trucks North America. So I'm here to talk to you about the school bus. So first of all, why the school bus? Steve said, hey, the school bus is a great application. I know there's a bunch of transit operators out in the audience and some school bus districts as well. But the school bus is, to me, a perfect application for the many pros it has. And we've kind of laid it out here. Our school bus named Julie, which I'll get into in a second, it's an asset. It's a pretty expensive asset. It's a vehicle that is often only utilized about 25% of the day. So it has idle time. It has a lot of idle time, which gives it huge opportunity for charging and some infrastructure, some vehicle to grid opportunities. The other opportunity for the school bus, why it's a darling for EV and electrification, is the fact that when it does operate, it's idling 35% of the time in some instances. So this is a vehicle that stop, start, and is often idling. Then when it's not actually running, it's sitting in a yard. So it gives it the perfect opportunity. The third reason why a school bus application is attractive, I think, is more emotional. At least it gets my emotions. That here we are transporting up to 90 school children on a bus, and the population of school buses out there is 525,000. It's the biggest independent form of mass communication in the US. Of those 500,000, 220,000 school buses have emissions prior to 2007, meaning they're considerably dirtier than today's application. So EV, electrifying the school bus fleet, to me is also an emotional, and it just feels right. It's the right thing to do, feeling good transporting our children to school on a vehicle that has absolutely no emissions on it. It does have one con, and it's a harder to get over, and it's different than the transit business, which might be 30, 40,000 miles a year. The school bus is accumulating 10 to 15,000. So the use case takes longer to prove out that TCO model, but as costs come down, I think that TCO model will be met over the next 2 or 3 years. So it's just a good application. Going on to the next slide, I want to introduce our product. This is Julie, and it was not meant to be the name Julie. We had a naming contest when we made our first vehicle here 4 years ago, and our employees gave names like Bolt, Lightning, Shock, and we had to say, no, this is a school bus. That kind of can sound frightening to school kids. It needs to be something that we can be proud of, and we chose the unit of energy joule to be our first product, and we took it to a trade show, and we had no intention of it being the name. But just like the school bus is a darling, almost personable, a member of the community, that name stuck. People started asking us, where is she? And when is Julie coming back? And when does production start? It was supposed to be just the project name of our first prototype, but we have since trademarked the name, and it seems to fit. We do have a 135-mile range, and that's realistic range. You can do some math out of 220 kilowatt hours of battery capacity and try to stretch that to 150, 155, but by the time you have heaters and air conditioners and other features on the bus, 135 miles is a applicable range. We drove a bus from North Carolina, our triad location in Winston-Salem, Greensboro, High Point, North Carolina, up to Virginia last week, 100% charge when we left, drove 117 miles and still had 17% battery charge when we got up to our dealership in Virginia. So we're happy about that. Also, not all EVs have transmissions. We have a 2-speed transmission. Some of them have direct drives, but we get a little additional efficiency out of that. We've gone with the DC fast charger. Our first prototype vehicle was AC charger, but we see DC as the way of the future, more expensive to get into the game, but far more realistic for everyday use with a charge time of 3 hours using a 60 kilowatt DC charger. So that's our product. That's our product that we're proud to have running around, and we're in production now. And we've got vehicles here in High Point accumulating thousands of miles a day, a test fleet that's running around, and a handful of this vehicles in customer hands. By the end of the year, it will be tens of vehicles in customer hands, and by next year, it will be hundreds of vehicles in customers' hands. So going on to the next slide, a few more of the advantages. I talked about that TCO and why it's a bit of a darling, from fuel, lack of belts. If you go into any of you transportation directors out there know that a lot of the ire of the school bus is that it idles a lot and it bogs up the after treatment system, which helps get us to a real good level of emissions, but there's none of that. There's far less moving parts. So we believe the maintenance cost as well as the operating costs are going to be considerably lower. Fuel cost, fueling versus charging, we believe is going to be about 75% reduction in fueling costs. So huge advantages of the school bus, and certainly the health benefits for the riders. Next slide. And talking about lessons that we've learned, many of you probably know more about EVs than I did, especially guys like Steve that have been doing it for years, but we just don't know what we don't know. That's how the way we started the program. And I remember the first deployment of a bus, and it was a transit that we learned from and that we copied proudly from. Dude had a Gantt chart that was like 5 pages long, because you have to deal with so much more than what we just know every day and we're comfortable with, and we don't have to plan for. But we try to provide these services and partner with other agencies to provide the services. We're not just a vehicle provider anymore. We have to do the route assessment. We have to do the TCO for economic feasibility. We team up with Daimler Financial Services for financial services. We're slowly becoming more intelligent on infrastructure, fleet management, and then what happens with these batteries at the end of the life. All very interesting points. But if we go to the next slide, we're making partners that we didn't know we were going to make in the past. 5 years ago, we would talk to utility companies, and utility companies would say, yeah, you're developing a school bus. Let us know what help you need. Anything that keeps the meters running, we're interested with, which wasn't really a collaborative approach. But later, now present day, our utilities are our partners, and we collaborate with them, and we think of business models that make more sense. A very close partner of ours is Dominion Energy in Virginia, and Dominion Energy is buying 50 buses from us this year, paying for the buses and the difference between a diesel bus and the electric bus cost, and then allowing the school districts to pay the other half, and then partnering to run the buses and then do vehicle to grid technologies and experimentations, and 10 years from now, full use of that. In fact, there's a bill that is being proposed to the Virginia legislature, which would slightly raise the cost of utilities in the state of Virginia to help fund 200 to 300 school buses a year. So 5 years from now, that all the school buses operating in the state of Virginia are electrified. So speaking of the lessons that Steve opened with, that I've learned, that our company learned, our organization has learned, is you don't know what you don't know. So you have to find new partners and not be comfortable with the ones that you've had in the past. We also have learned within the company and working with these partners, we have to expect to get a bloody nose from time to time. If we just stand pat and we wait for what we're comfortable with, we're not moving and we're isolating ourselves, and nothing will change, and we're really not going to progress that quickly in the EV space. But if we're willing to shut our eyes and walk in the woods, we might bump into a tree from time to time, get that bloody nose, but never really get real physical permanent damage. So that's kind of an adage of ours. And the last one is to find the right partners to deal with. They're partners that we traditionally haven't dealt with in the past, but we're making new friends and learning new things. Kind of in summary, for us to getting to this point where we've got vehicles running around in our town now and passing them on to the customer, it's just been a fun ride, and it's only going to get bigger. And when I stand back and I think about what we've done over the course of time, I'm proud of what we've done, because we're paving the way what I think will be industry standard, what has to be industry standard 5-10 years from now, and doing so much to clean up the air with so many vehicles running around that we can eliminate anything coming out of the tailpipe. So we continue to learn. Thank you for listening to me. I'll pass it back to you, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Caley. That was fantastic, and such a critical technology for cleaning up the bus stops and schoolyards that our children are playing in. Thomas Built is clearly pioneering a deployment model that is essential for scaling up the adoption of electric school buses. This market is a rapidly developing one, propelled by utility-led partnerships, as Caley presented, as well as the VW settlement funds. With nearly 500,000 school buses in the nation's fleet and with about 650 electric school buses sold or delivered to date, we are just starting to see this market develop. This reminds me of where we were in the transit market about 8 years ago. Next slide, please. As a zero-emission bus nerd, I like to keep tabs on how this zero-emission bus market is developing. First of all, it's great to see that zero-emission buses are being put into service across the country. This tells me that everyone recognizes the need for and the benefits of zero-emission. Secondly, 2020 will be a milestone year for zero-emission buses, surpassing the thresholds of 200 zero-emission buses awarded or sold and 1,000 zero-emission buses deployed. Congratulations to everyone that has been a part of helping this market develop. Next slide. So how do we continue on this journey? What is it going to take to scale from a pilot project to a full fleet of zero-emission vehicles? We envision that there are several key technologies required to achieve zero-emission buses at scale. Like any market transformation, the technologies and tools we have are developing and maturing. As we would expect, electric drive has the greatest degree of technical maturity. On the other hand, a resilient, redundant, and low-cost fuel supply is currently the least mature. It will take continuous improvement and maturity across all of these technologies to successfully scale to 100% zero-emission fleet. Even more important is that technical maturity must take place while reducing incremental costs so that 100% zero-emission bus transition can occur without reductions in transit service. Today's panelists will explore what new technologies and strategies are allowing agencies to scale to an electric fleet. Each panelist will share a specific concept that is enabling their agency or customer to achieve their zero-emission bus goals. First on the panel, we have Caley Macias from the Regional Transportation District in Denver, Colorado. Caley is a senior transportation planner, and we'll turn it over to her. Caley?
Thanks, Steve. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thanks. So like Steve said, I'm Caley Macias. I'm a senior transportation planner at RTD in Denver. And today I'm going to be talking about RTD's electric bus fleet and our partnership with our utility, Xcel Energy. Next slide. So my map's a little bit different than the one that Steve showed. So mine are actual deployments, whereas I think Steve was looking at awards and purchases. So it looks a little bit different. I feel like some of the really, leading agencies or the earliest ones are more spread out across the country. So you see a good number of people or agencies in the Midwest and the South, as well as the coasts. And I like this, this is from the APTA 2020 vehicle database, which still shows RTD with the largest electric bus fleet, although I believe Antelope Valley has a larger fleet than us now. But I would encourage any agencies out there listening to report your data to APTA so you get that captured. Next slide. So RTD is a relatively large transit agency. Our service area covers over 2,300 square miles and 3 million people. Our annual ridership is about 100 million a year. And we have a pretty large bus fleet with over 1,000 buses. Next slide. So our electric bus fleet right now is 36 BYD buses. They operate on our 16th Street Mall in downtown Denver. It's kind of a shuttle route that serves downtown workers and residents. It's a short route, about a mile, and it's very frequent, especially in the peaks. So it's like about every 90 seconds, and it stops at every intersection. They were deployed it was a staggered deployment because we didn't receive all the buses at once. So they hit the streets between 2016 and 2018. And there's quite a bit of ridership on this route with over 10 million boardings a year. And our fleet of 36 buses have about 1.2 million miles on the road, including both revenue and non-revenue service. So we've gotten a lot of experience with these buses, and they're charged overnight with depot chargers. We have 30 of those that are 80 kilowatts, and our bus battery size is almost 300 kilowatt hours. And we do not have diesel heaters on these buses, so they draw energy from the battery, but we are considering diesel heaters for our next fleet because it does get quite cold in Denver. Next slide. Thanks. So talking about our work with Xcel Energy, we didn't start out on the best foot. I think like Caley was saying, you know, I think a lot of utilities were just like, okay, tell me how much power you need, you know, it's very transactional. And that's how we started out with our utility. But we quickly learned that that was not going to work with a fleet of our size. And so you can see from some of these news headlines, especially Xcel gouges RTD. It's really not great for Xcel or RTD. It's not a good look. So I think when a lot of this news started coming out, we knew that we needed to sit down and talk about what was not going right with this. We had expected to pay a lot less in our energy costs than we were. And Xcel wasn't even aware that they needed to educate us on, you know, how utility rates work and what would be the best for our fleet. So we talked with Xcel and some other EV stakeholders and worked together to develop an EV rate. So this is a rate that is really, you know, targeted for this new market. I think EVs need a different type of electricity rate than buildings and residences and other things. So yeah, the EV rate included, it was a time of use rate, so it had an on-peak and an off-peak period. And then it also had critical peak pricing and lower demand charges, which was great. Next slide. So this is our charging load kind of on an average weekday. You can see, go to the next slide. This is kind of our service overlaid on this. So you can see we have pretty focused peak service. And then when the buses come back in at around 6 p.m., they just start charging. So go to the next slide. So this is the on-peak period with the new rate. So you can see immediately that there's a bit of a mismatch. We do quite a bit of charging between 6 and 9 p.m. And this is a challenge we've had to deal with this rate, where we've gotten a lot of benefits, but we also need to change our behavior. And we need to shift this load to save money, but we also don't want to increase our demand charges by having a higher peak. So it's very much a kind of ongoing challenge that we're trying to figure out. Next slide. So, you know, like I was saying before, a large part of our costs were from demand charges, almost 80%. And the new EV rate really helped with that. So next slide. So you can see the difference. This is based on 2019 usage, how much we would save on this new EV rate compared to the old secondary general rate. So we're estimating that we're going to be saving between 25 and 30% on this new rate because we charged during the off-peak period already and because they lowered those demand charges. Next slide. So this is kind of where we're at so far. We started on the new rate in January. And already, without really changing our behavior much, we're already saving 20%, which has been fantastic. During COVID, it's been a bit different because our service has been reduced. There's not a lot going on in downtown right now. So the data we're collecting is not exactly helpful, but we are seeing that we still save more on this EV rate than we would have on our old rate. Next slide. So this is just a few of the things that we're going to be working on together with Xcel. You know, we started out together partnering just to figure out a new EV rate, but I think we've seen that we have a lot of shared interests and that we can benefit each other's organizations. So we've improved our coordination. With our next fleet that we're getting with grant funding, Xcel is going to be paying for a good amount of the infrastructure, which is fantastic. Xcel is also working on a transportation electrification plan, which is currently being reviewed by the PUC. And this plan has dollars for lots of kinds of investment as well as research opportunities, which we're hoping to partner with Xcel on that, especially around smart charging and things like that. And then finally, the great thing about having a large utility is that there are multiple transit agencies in their service area. So we discovered that we have a great partner in Metro Transit in Minneapolis that we can share lessons learned with working with the same people at Xcel. So, you know, and then Xcel also has the benefit of seeing, okay, this is what we did with Metro Transit and it worked well. Maybe we can apply it in Colorado or vice versa. So it's been great to have that partner in Metro Transit where we can talk to each other and then we can talk to Xcel and then all of us can talk together. So really sharing those lessons learned, especially
Carly,
when you
seem to have lost you there.
utility.
All right, well.
Oop. But that basically wraps up my presentation. You can go to the next slide. I'm happy to answer any questions after we're all done presenting.
Terrific. Thank you, Carly. Thought we had lost you there for a moment, but you came back. Terrific.
Sorry. Do you want me to cover anything that I missed?
No, it was only out for a second, so and maybe it was on just on my computer. So
Okay.
so we'll take any questions at the end of the session here. Our next panelist is Chance Baragary. He's a project director with Metro in St. Louis, Missouri. Chance.
Thank you, Steve. Steve mentioned I'm with Metro in St. Louis. I'm going to give you a quick overview of our electric bus fleet that we're excited to be putting on the street early next year. Next slide, please. Here's a quick look at our overall system. A little over 6,000 bus stops, a little over 45 miles of light rail track. Next slide, please. Existing services, we don't have as many as Carly. Over 400 buses. In addition to that, 123 caller ride vans. That's our paratransit service. A little over 21 million miles, or almost 22 million miles for our fleet of buses pre-COVID. And just a quick intro here to bi-state development. We've got our Metro Transit, which handles all things transit related in the St. Louis area. Bi-state development also has businesses of the Gateway Arch. We have a partnership with the National Park Service and operating the Arch, St. Louis Downtown Airport, which I believe is the third busiest airport in Illinois, and the St. Louis Regional Freightway that handles all things considered with promoting freight in St. Louis and Missouri. Next slide, please. Our initial battery electric bus fleet that we've got coming, actually the first one arrives this week. First 60-footer arrives this week. We've got 14 60-footers, New Flyers, 4 40-foot Gilligs coming, and we have 6 more 40-foot Gilligs on order that will be arriving next year. Next slide, please. Here's a quick shot of our depot chargers, of our layout for our chargers we're installing in our depot. All of our buses are going to be housed in the same garage. They will all utilize depot charging. The 60-foot buses will also utilize en-route charging to enable us to keep our battery size down and make longer runs with those. And I won't go through all the details here, but the important takeaway from this, we are utilizing 2-to-1 dispenser to charger ratios on our ABB chargers. These are all 150 kilowatt hour or 150 kilowatt chargers in our garage. And when we're planning out our positions for our dispensers, there's obviously a lot of concerns taken into account there with operational flexibility, wanting to make sure we don't have a bus trapped behind another one that's still on a charger in front, and trying to match that up and then also be able to expand as our fleet grows. Next slide, please. So our depot charging primary focus is expansion of our 40-foot bus fleet. We have 14 60-footers coming. We don't anticipate adding any 60-footers. We do anticipate growing our 40-foot battery electric bus fleet as we realize success putting this first fleet on the road. We're looking to minimize downtime as we make that expansion. So we're building into our switch gear additional breaker capacity, and we're stubbing out conduits. So we'll be able to set those chargers in and minimize the downtime for our chargers that are buses that are on the road. We're also putting in solar taps because we're hoping for a project in the future to add a large solar array to our roof and help supplement our energy supply there. And then one note here, we are on our 2-to-1 charger ratio, 2-to-1 dispenser ratios, excuse me, we are pairing New Flyer buses and Gillig buses, and all parties involved seem to think this is the first time that's ever been done. No one sees any reason it won't work, but we are looking forward to figuring out how to make that happen. Next slide, please. Here's a quick shot of our site where we're putting in our on-route charging. We're actually reconfiguring the site, moving some curbs, making space for our charge equipment yard, and just kind of, it's an overall revamp of our site to be able to put this in. Next slide, please. Here's just a rendering of what this is going to look like. Where this M sign is on a partition that separates our equipment yard from the main areas. We're taking down a shelter, we're adding a new shelter. Next slide, please. Just another shot here of a different view. Next slide, please. I want to touch on some of the key planning considerations that we've used to put this project together, and as we're managing through this. Utility agreement, similar to Carly's, working with our utility, Ameren, Missouri here. We have a very good cooperative agreement with them. We've actually donated a space for them to build a new substation right just immediately adjacent to our garage, and that will help with our power reliability, obviously, and make sure we have plenty of power for our initial fleet and as our fleet continues to grow. We're looking at optimizing our rates. We're carrying that over to our charge management logic and trying to optimize as much as possible, being able to charge in the off-peak windows. Our 40-foot buses will be on a morning run and an afternoon run, so they will have some peak daytime charging, but we're working to push that to off-peak as much as we can. Our on-site charging considerations, I mentioned site configuration, distance between dispensers is a key consideration there. I think that's they can't have them too close together. The communications ends up being jumbled. Equipment lead times for the on-route chargers we have found is considerably longer than the depot chargers. And then finally, in the depot area, all of our dispensers are overhead in our main bus parking area where we're going to have these. We're putting reels with ropes to pull them down. We're making sure to not have the ropes or the cables hanging down where we're going to snag them on a mirror. Want to make sure we have room for our charging or for our cleaning crews to move between buses in the garage at night. And as I mentioned earlier, distance between sequential chargers, we're finding that there is a limit to those to the distances between the second and third charger. So we're having to take that into consideration as we lay out our garage. And then obviously the operating logistics, the charging windows, and the charge management considerations associated with that. Steve, that's all I've got. I'll hand it back to you.
Terrific. Thank you, Chance. Next on our panel, we have Jörn Schwarze. Jörn is the Chief Technology Officer for KVB, an operator serving Cologne, Germany, and it's very late there. So Jörn, thank you for joining us so late in your day.
Yeah, thanks, Steve, for the introduction, and hello to everyone from Germany, Cologne. Next slide, please. Cologne is located right in the middle of Europe. You can see that on the red dot on the right side at the picture. And greetings to Atlanta, to the host of this webinar. Next slide, please. To be a little bit more precise, you see the red dot, that is Cologne on the blue area on the map, and the map, the blue area, is the Transport Authority Rhineland, and on the left-hand side you see our rail services, and our services are done, 95% of our services are done in the city limits of Cologne, and we are proud that we are one of the first addresses in Germany for public transport, therefore. Next slide, please. A brief overview, we have 286 million passengers as well pre-COVID time, and we have nearly 4,000 employees, and the rest of the figures you can see by yourself or later on. Next slide, please. We have, next slide, please. We have in April, during the COVID pandemic, on the high point of the pandemic, only 15% of our passengers per day left. We are back at 65% in September, and we are sure that this pandemic, that we are hit and affected by the influence of the COVID for the next 2 years, and we are back on 100% maybe in 2023 first. That is really a shame, but we cannot change that anymore or anyhow. Next slide, please. So I come to the bus section. We have 367 buses. 2 of 3 of these buses are articulated buses. We have 3 depots. Please, next slide. These 3 depots are well located over the city map, as you can see, to avoid empty trips and to reduce these empty trips, the length of the empty trips. And on the left-hand side, you see our bus services, and you see as well the majority of our lines are within the city limits, as I already mentioned. Next slide, please. Now, we started with our first e-bus line with service in 2016. We bought these buses from VDL in 2014. And we already got the target from the city council that we have to be completely emission-free until 2030. Next slide, please. Therefore, we bought already, as you can see, with the green lines, we will be on service until 2021. We bought already 53 buses from the manufacturer VDL. These buses are opportunity chargers. We will establish 14 charging infrastructure points at the end of the line, and we will buy within the next month 51 additional e-buses, and these buses will be on service until end of 2022. And for sure we are proud then at this time we will deploy end of 22 one of the largest e-bus fleets in Europe for sure. Next slide, please. That is the bus what we already bought from VDL. We will have a capacity from the battery 420 kilowatt hours we will have on board, and we express the range, how long we can ride or let the buses run under every circumstances, and the range is at least 5 hours under every circumstances, means -9 degrees during the winter time and congestion at the lines. And the battery weight is already only 2,700 kilograms only anymore. That is 30% better than we expected as we calculated the development of the battery density in 2015. So we expect that we reach the depot charging, what can I say, a complete depot charging bus quite earlier than we expect. Our latest calculation were 2030, therefore, for the large buses. Next slide, please. So therefore, for the electric buses, you have to modify your depots. We started with our Depot North. At the end of 2020, we will establish and deploy 53 stations for overnight charging of the buses. The connection to the power substation will be done with a power rate of 6 MVA. And due to the fact that we have to establish a charging facility on this depot, we will lose approximately 80 parkings for the e-buses at the final stage, and therefore we had to buy a new area for depot. Next slide, please. And this picture shows you the situation in June with the garage there for the charging infrastructure. At the end of the garage, you see the little houses for the charging facilities. Next slide, please. Here you see where we bought the area for the depot ports, and you see that we bought on a strategic, very logical point to be very well positioned at the city. Next slide, please. And here you see our first plannings for the depot ports. The service will start in 22 with approximately 51 buses, and we will have 50 buses there on service, and only e-buses will be there from the beginning on. Next slide, please. We estimated and calculated the charging time underneath the charging infrastructure. Please, the next slide. As you can see here, and Chance already mentioned that a one-to-one relation is not really necessary for the charging infrastructure and the bus. And we expect that we will have a 1-to-3 or 1-to-0.5 relation between bus and charging infrastructure. And if you underlay this calculation, then it's quite logical. Next slide, please. That to drive the buses from and to the charging infrastructure can be done and will be done autonomously, and to save capacity from humans. And that is what we would like to implement within the next years. So in the next slide, please. I'm really running out of time. That is a resume and a roundup for you. That is what we learned during the last years as we deploy this larger fleet of e-buses. And thank you for your attention. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jörn. And last on our panel, we have Simon Lonsdale. He's the head of sales and strategy for Amply Power. Now, Simon will be presenting on a project with Tri-Delta Transit, which provides service to the eastern Contra Costa County in the Bay Area. Simon?
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, and Jörn, thanks. Good evening to you. Next slide, please. As Steve said, I'm really here to talk to you all about lessons from the field, and representing Tri-Delta Transit, who is a smaller agency, total of around 60 buses over 15 routes. They have had a reduced service during COVID. However, I'm really pleased that they are fully operating their electric buses, of which they have 4 right now, 2 BYD and 2 Proterra electric buses. On their plan now to getting to 30 electric buses, about half of the fleet within the next few years. Next slide, please. What Tri-Delta found was that as a smaller agency, they did not have a lot of personnel and staff to dedicate to the electrification operations and the differences that made in their depot and around the fleet. They had a mix, because they had a mix of buses. They also had a mix of charging stations, and they deployed smart charging and found two great wins out of that smart charging deployment. Number one is the one I think you'd expect, which is significant savings on their fuel costs, their electric fuel. But the second was really around the reliability of these buses and making these buses a like-for-like replacement. And that's an interesting thing when you look at having drivers that are driving electric buses and driving non-electric buses as well. And that use case of the whole process of plugging in, making sure the vehicle is charging and unplugging. What you can see on this slide is that in this case, the smart charging system was able to really reduce the PG&E bill Pacific Gas and Electric is the utility there. Interestingly, in the 12 months that this smart charging has been in place now, there's probably been, including the change to the new battery electric vehicle rate, this will be the 5th change in the rate tariff and the pricing from PG&E. And I think we're seeing this more and more, that staying on top of changes and how to optimize the price and the cost of your electricity that's going into vehicles is really key. TriDelta was able to use smart charging so that the vehicles come back early to mid-afternoon, from about 1 p.m. to about 4 p.m. The driver is told to plug the vehicle in. And so obviously what was happening was that these vehicles were starting to charge up right in the middle of the afternoon and through the evening, and were fully charged just about the time when cheap power came on stream from PG&E. And so the smart charging does 2 things. Number one, it delays when those vehicles are going to be charged until the cheapest time of use rate. And number 2, it staggers the charging out so that the vehicles are charged and ready to go in the morning, but are fueled consecutively through the evening time. And so this system allows the TriDelta to very closely manage the actual flow of energy through the meter, and hence the price of that energy, and keep their price low. Next slide, please. As the fleet operator at TriDelta, they can look at a dashboard to see where they're at. And what they find interesting is not just does it show the vehicles that are charging, but it shows vehicles that are in the depot but not plugged in or are not actively connected. This staging area is accessed through the telematics, geofencing, what's in the depot, but is really helpful because if a driver has not plugged in, right, they got out and walked away, if it has plugged in but not mated correctly, if any of those circumstances have happened, it's very clear to them that they need to take action, and then notified of any issues, so that it ensures that the vehicles reach that top part of the stage, top part of the screen, ready to go. So these screenshots from a few days ago, just before midnight, right in the middle of charging. TriDelta also likes that the expected time that it's ready, so they're kind of the ETR, expected time of readiness to go again, is shown all the time. Next slide, please. Drilling in on it, they're able to look at the schedule, and I know there's a lot of data on this screen, but what this is showing is 2 things. It's showing in the background the state of charge of these vehicles throughout the past 24 hours, and how their usage is. And this has allowed TriDelta to extend the range that they're on, and then of these vehicles, put them out into the afternoon as well. And then in the bottom, it's showing the schedule. So it's looking forwards. As I said, this screenshot was around midnight the other night, and it looks forwards in 15-minute increments about the power levels that these vehicles will draw upon to maintain the most optimal charging rate, and also the cost in real time that TriDelta is facing from this. Next slide, please. So wrapping up, you've heard multiple viewpoints from the panelists today. For TriDelta as a smaller agency, but still on the leading edge of planning electrification, smart charging has brought them 2 main things. Number 1, the savings that people would expect, but number 2, the reliability that these vehicles are charged up and ready to go every morning, and that they can use them like for like, and extend the usage, the miles that they're driving in these vehicles. So hopefully that we've got some time for Q&A now, and I'll hand back to Steve. Thank you very much, everybody.
Excellent. Thank you, Simon. So I think we've just seen from our panel a lot of really good strategies and tools for helping agencies scale up to a full fleet of zero-emission vehicles. In the session earlier today, Dan suggested that you ask me all the difficult questions, but fortunately as moderator, I get to spin off all those difficult questions to this panel that is much smarter than I. So We've got a lot of good questions coming through. Let's go ahead and get started on those. First question is, school districts tend to sell old buses to third world countries. What are the plans for the old diesel buses as the school districts are migrating to zero emission buses? These countries need to migrate to zero emission buses as well. Very good point. Can you prevent the sale of diesel vehicles to these countries and help them to migrate to zero emission buses as well? So initially, a lot of these buses that will be going out into market will be funded using VW funds. So fortunately, those VW funds have a requirement that you must destroy the vehicle and the engine before when you replace it with an electric bus. But Caley was wondering if you had any further thoughts on that particular issue.
So Steve, this is Mark Childers. Caley had to step out to another meeting, so I'm supporting to answer the questions in the Q&A. So yes, I think you know, from the standpoint of used buses, there are multiple paths where those buses are, you know, used in third world countries. They're shipped out. There's diesels. I think that's something we have to involve in our policymakers about that. That's a very large industry that will require a very collective effort to determine how to you know, manage that entire second life of vehicles. Certainly the VW programs was very insightful to require disposal of assets to be used. And I think that's a very wise way in which the program was structured so that we can take diesels off of the roads in the United States.
All right, very good. Jörn, so just like the battery electric and fuel cell debate earlier today, one of these days we're going to have to debate about pantograph up versus pantograph down. But the question for you is, sounds like, you know, have you encountered challenges with your en route or opportunity charges due to the fact that they may be unattended or vulnerable overnight or vulnerable to damage or vandalism? Has that been an issue or concern with you?
No,
Or
absolutely not. Absolutely not. We have no damages at all over the time since 2015. Not recognizable. It's well respected in Cologne, this technology.
All right. Going back to battery electric and fuel cell. So obviously from, you know, the discussion earlier today, and, you know, we're seeing a lot of chat about this, a lot of discussion about battery electric versus fuel cell, and, you know, why one technology may have been chosen over the other. So we'll kind of go around the room, and Jörn, we'll start with you.
Pose the question to me.
The question is, do you consider both fuel cell and battery electric, and so why did you select battery electric?
At the beginning of the project, we asked for what can I say, prices for the full cell buses, and at the end of our calculation, it was quite clear that it is quite cheaper for us in this situation, in that situation, 2015, to have a battery bus on the route with a smaller battery for sure than we have right now applied, and to implement charging facilities at the end of the lines. We will overthink our strategy in 2023, 2024. You have to stabilize a little bit your strategy, because you buy buses, you have to implement and you have to deploy charging infrastructure, and you cannot change your strategy within half a year or a year. You have to say, okay, for the next 3 years, you stay stable with your strategy, and then you overthink think your strategy. And up to now, our latest calculations are still in the same direction, that for us in Germany, electric buses with overnight charging and charging facility at the end of the line is cheaper than full cell buses.
Carly, same question to you.
Sure. So we have an interesting story of how we got our electric buses. We've always had alternative fuel vehicles on our 16th Street Mall because there's thousands of pedestrians that walk on that mall every day. So we actually, our procurement was set up to request bids for non-diesel vehicles. And we got a bid, I think, from a hybrid company and then BYD for electric. So if a hydrogen fueling vehicle manufacturer had bid on it, there's a possibility we could have had hydrogen. Although with the upfront costs, that might not have quite made sense for 36 vehicles. But that's why we were kind of early on. I mean, not as early as some other agencies, but we ordered these vehicles, I believe, in 2014. So it was early days, and that's kind of what was out there, and that's the bid that we received that was the most compelling, and that's how we ended up with our fleet.
All right, and Chance, we'll give you a shot at that question as well.
All right, Steve. Frankly, that decision was made before I got involved in the project. But from what I understand, the opportunity to partner with Ameren, our utility company, and the substation they're putting there by our garage, obviously made it beneficial for us to go electric. I think the upfront capital costs is a consideration. And I know that there has been discussion. There's talk of potentially going fuel cell in the future, but right now our sights are set on electrification.
All right. Next question. This will be for Mark as well. The person's curious about electric school bus charging. Asking, can Julie do both AC and DC charging, or just DC? And if just DC, can you speak to the advantages of DC and why DC only was chosen?
Sure, great question. So I would say in terms of our vehicle, we are just a DC charge vehicle. Our process of engineering that DC charge was looking down the future in terms of being able to find a path for growth in the electric school bus. Where could it charge rapidly and quickly? If the vehicle is going to be stretched in terms of the range capabilities of the school bus beyond, multiple routes, stack routes on a school bus, then we saw the need to charge very quickly, to take on multiple routes at school districts. The other piece of that is that we just see that the DC charge is a much more durable and mature type of application for medium duty vehicles. And so we selected the DC as the primary for our vehicle. So the DC charge is what we have today. We can charge that vehicle in less than 3 hours with a 60 kilowatt charger.
All right. Next question is about utility EV rates. So is EV rates from utilities, is this something that most utilities would be familiar with? Or would small regional utilities such as co-ops have to be educated about this? So I think actually the answer to both questions are yes. Most utilities are familiar with the need for EV rates, let's put it that way. Several of the larger utilities have actually implemented EV rates, and we've seen a variety out there. So it tells me that it's very early days for EV rates across the country, because it doesn't seem like there's any single one solution that's going to meet the needs for everyone. But definitely, regardless of it, if your utility is educated or not, I think you still need to educate them on what your specific needs are. because a lot of times it seemed that the schedules are designed around, light duty residential charging versus heavy duty charging that's needed by transit agencies, either during the day or overnight. So with that, we've ended up our time with everyone today. I'd like to thank all of our speakers, Caley, Edgerly, Chance Baragary, Jörn, Schwarze, Simon Lonsdale, and Carly from RTD.